So, hello and welcome back yet again to Beverly of Graustark by George Barr McCutcheon. We are sporting our wearable blanket today because it's cold. It is so stupidly cold, and I know I should not be complaining about the fact that it is cold outside when I'm pretty sure a lot of the United States is getting some really nasty weather, but I'm not there, I'm here, and here it's just plain old cold. I don't even think we are going to top like 14 or 15 degrees Fahrenheit today. And that's just cold. And I'm going to complain and pop on my wearable blanket and be thankful that I'm not getting an ice storm. So my heart goes out to everybody that's getting hit with the bad weather today. Usually it's me getting hit with the bad weather, so sympathy and empathy out to anybody that's getting hit. But we are back and we are going to be reading chapter 15 of Beverly of Graustark, where evidently Beverly has decided that maybe Baldos is going to tell everybody where the weak points in the fortress are that he saw, and that will somehow prove to them that he's useful. I don't know. I guess we're going to have to wait and see. But that is where we left off, and that is where we are going to be picking up with chapter 15, which is titled The Testing of Baldos. I should have cleaned these. Hang on. You can tell that I did not grow up wearing glasses because I always grab them by the lens. Not a great idea. Anyway, chapter 15. A few hours later, all was dark and silent within the castle. On the stone walks below, the steady tread of the sentinels rose on the still air. In the hallways, the trusted guardsmen glided about like specters or stood like statues. An hour before, the great edifice had been bright and full of animation, and now it slumbered. It was 2 o'clock. The breath of roses scented the air. The gurgle of fountains was the only music that touched the ear. Beverly Calhoun, dismissing Aunt Fanny, stepped from her window out upon the great stone balcony. A rich dressing gown, loose and comfortable, was her costume. Something told her that sleep would be a long time coming, and an hour in the warm, delightful atmosphere of the night was more attractive than the close, sleepless silence of her own room. Every window along the balcony was dark, proving that the entire household had retired to rest. But she was troubled. The fear had entered her head that the castle folk were regretting the advent of Baldos, that everyone was questioning the wisdom of his being in the position that he occupied through her devices. Her talk with him did much to upset her tranquility. That he knew so much of the fortress bore out the subtle suspicions of Dangloss and maybe even the others. She was troubled, not that she doubted him, but that if anything went wrong, an accusation against him, however unjust, would be hard to overcome, and she would be to blame for at least most of it. For many minutes she sat in the dark shadow of a great pillar, her elbows upon the balustrade, staring dreamily into the star-studded vault above her. Far away in the air, she could see the tiny yellow lights of the monastery, the lonely sentinel on the mountaintop. From the heights near that abode of peace and penitence, an enemy could destroy the fortress to the south. Had not Baldos told her so? One big gun would do the work if it could be taken to that altitude. Baldos could draw a perfect map of the fortress. He could tell precisely where the shells should fall, and already the chief men in Edelweiss were wondering who he was and to what end he might utilize his knowledge. They were watching him. They were warning her. For the first time since she came to the castle, she felt a sense of loneliness and a certain degree of unhappiness. She could not shake off the feeling that she was, after all, alone in believing in Baldos. Her heart told her that the tall, straightforward fellow that she had met in the hills was honest as the day. She was deceiving him, she realized, but he was misleading no one. Off in a distant part of the castle ground, she could see the long square shadow that marked the location of the barracks and their mess room. There he was sleeping, confidently believing in her and her power to save him from all harm. Something in her soul cried out to him that she would be staunch and true, and that he could sleep without a tremor of apprehensiveness. Suddenly she smiled nervously and drew back into the shadow of the pillar. It occurred to her that he might be looking across the moonlit park, looking directly at her through all that shadowed distance. She was conscious of a strange glow in her cheeks and a quickening of the blood as she pulled the folds of her gown across her bare throat. Not the moon, nor the stars, nor the light in St. Valentine's, but the black thing away off there on the earth. Beverly jumped as if something supernatural had approached her and turned to face Princess Yetive, who was almost right next to her. Yetive, how did you get here? That is what you're looking at, dear, said Yetive. Why aren't you in bed? What about you? I thought you were sound asleep long ago, said Beverly, abominating the guilty feeling that came over her. Princess Yetive threw her arm across Beverly's shoulder. I've been watching you for half an hour, she said. Can't two look at the moon and the stars as well as one? Isn't it my grim old castle? Let us sit here together and just dream for a while. You're such a dear, Yetive, said Beverly. But listen, I want you to get something out of your head. I was not looking at any one place in particular. Beverly, I believe that you were thinking of Baldos, said Yetive. Ridiculous, said Beverly, conscious for the first time that he was almost never actually out of her thoughts. The realization came like a blow, and her eyes grew very wide. And you're troubled on his account. I can tell. Well, Yetive, why shouldn't I be worried? I brought him here against his will, said Beverly. If anything happens to him, Don't be afraid, Beverly. I have as much confidence in him as you do. His eyes are true. Grenfall believes in him as well, and so does Mr. Anguish. Gren says that he would swear by him no matter who he is. But what about the others? Whispered Beverly. Baron Dangloss is his friend, and so is Quinnox. They know a man. The Count is different. I hate that old wretch. Hush. He has not wronged you. No, but he has been unfair and mean to Baldos. That is a soldier's lot, my dear. But he might be Prince Danton or Frederick or that other one, said Beverly. In that event, he would be an honorable soldier, and we have nothing to fear in him. Neither of them is our enemy. It is the possibility that he is not one of them that makes his presence here look dangerous, you know." "Well, I just don't want to talk about him," said Beverly. But she was disappointed when the princess obligingly changed the subject. Baldos was not surprised, scarcely more than even interested, when a day or two later he was summoned to appear before the Board of Strategy. If anyone had told him, however, that on a recent night a pair of dreamy gray eyes had tried to find his window in the great black shadow of the barracks, he might have actually jumped in amazement and delight. For at that very hour he had been looking off towards the castle, and his thoughts had been on a girl who drew back into the shadows of the pillar. The Graustark ministry had received news from the south. Messengers came in with the alarming and significant report that Dawsbergen was strengthening her fortifications in the passes and moving their war supplies north. It meant that Gabriel and his people expected a fight and were preparing for it. Count Halfort hastily called all the ministers together, and Laurie and the princess took part in their deliberations. General Marlanx represented the army, and it was he who finally asked to have Baldos brought before the council. The Iron Count plainly intimated that the new guard was in a position to transmit valuable information to their enemies. Colonel Quinnox sent for him, and Baldos was soon standing in the presence of Yetive and her advisors. He looked around with a singular smile. The one who he was supposed to regard as the princess was not in the council chamber. Laurie opened the examination at the request of Count Halfort, the premier. Baldos quietly answered the questions concerning his present position, his age, his term of enlistment, and his interpretations of all the obligations required of him. "Ask him who he really is," said the Iron Count. "We can expect but one answer to that question," said Laurie, "and that is the one which he chooses to give." "My name is Baldos." "Paul Baldos," said the guard, but he said it in such a way that no one could mistake his appreciation of the fact that he could give one name as well as any other and still serve all of his own purposes. "That is lie number one," said Count Marlanx. Every eye turned upon Baldos, but his face did not lose its half-mocking expression of serenity. "Proceed with the examination, Mr. Laurie," said Count Halfort, interpreting a quick glance from Princess Yetive. "Are you willing to answer any and all questions we may ask in connection with your observations since you became a member of the Castle Guard?" said Laurie. "I am." "Did you take especial care to study the interior of the fortress when you were there days ago?" "I did." "Have you discussed your observations with anyone since then?" "I have." "With who?" "With Her Highness the Princess," said Baldos without a quiver. There was a moment's silence, and furtive looks were cast in the direction of Yetive, whose face was a study. Almost instantaneously, the entire body of listeners understood that he referred to Beverly Calhoun. Baldos felt that he had been summoned before the board at the instigation of his fair protectress. "And your impressions have gone no further?" said Laurie. "They have not, sir. It was most confidential." "Could you accurately reproduce plans of the fortress?" "I think so," said Baldos. "It would be very simple." "Have you studied engineering?" "Yes." And could you scientifically enumerate the defects in the construction of the fort? That would not be very difficult, sir, said Baldos. It has come to our ears that you consider the fortress weak in several areas. Have you so stated at any time? I told the princess that the fortress is deplorably weak. In fact, I think I mentioned that it could be taken with ease. Baldos was not looking at Count Marlanx, but he knew that the old man's eyes were flaming. He then proceeded to tell the board how he could overcome the fortress, elaborating on his remarks to Beverly. The ministers listened in wonder to the words of this calm, indifferent young man. "Will you oblige us by making a rough draft of the fort's interior?" said Laurie, after a long, solemn pause. Baldos took the paper and in remarkably short time drew the exact layout of the fortress. The sketch went the rounds, and apprehensive looks were exchanged by all the ministers. "It's accurate, by Jove," said Laurie. "I doubt if a dweller of the fort could do better." "You seem to have been very observant." "And very interested," snarled Count Marlanx. "Only as far as I imagined my observations might be to the benefit of someone else," said Baldos coolly. Again, the silence was like death. "Do you know what you're saying, Baldos?" asked Laurie after a minute. "Certainly, Mr. Laurie," said Baldos. "It is the duty of any servant of Her Highness to give her all that he has in him. If my observations can help her, I feel duty-bound to make the best of them for her sake, not my own." "Perhaps you can suggest modifications in the fort," snarled Count Marlanx. "Why don't you do it, sir, and let us have the benefit of your superior intellect? No, gentlemen, all of this prattling of loyalty does not need to deceive us." He sprang to his feet. "This fellow is nothing more or less than an infernal spy, and the tower is the place for him. He can't harm us there." "If it were my intention to do harm, gentlemen," said Baldos, "do you imagine that I should withhold my information for days? If I am a spy, you may rest assured that Count Marlanx's kindness should not have been so long disregarded. A spy does not believe in delay." My kindness?" cried Marlanx. "What do you mean, sir?" "I mean this, Count Marlanx," said Baldos, looking steadily into the eyes of the head of the army. "It was kind and considerate of you to admit me to the fortress, no matter in what capacity, especially at a critical time like this. You don't know me. You had no way of telling whether or not my intentions were honest or otherwise, and yet I was permitted to go through the fortress from end to end. No spy could have asked for a better generosity than that." An almost imperceptible smile went around the table, and every listener save one breathed more freely. The candor and the boldness of the guard won the respect and confidence of everyone except for Count Marlanx. The Iron Count turned white with anger. He took the examination out of Laurie's hands and plied the stranger with insulting questions, each calm answer making him more furious than before. At last, in sheer impotence, he relapsed into silence, waving his hand to Laurie to indicate that he should continue questioning. "You will understand, Baldos, that we have some cause for apprehension," said Laurie, immensely gratified by the outcome of the argument. You are a stranger, and whether you admit it or not, there is reason to believe that you are not who you say you are. I am but a humble guard right now, sir, and a loyal one. My life is yours if I prove otherwise. Yetive whispered something in her husband Laurie's ear. She was visibly pleased and seemed excited. Laurie looked doubtful for an instant and then apparently followed her suggestion, regardless of the consequences. Would you be willing to utilize your knowledge as an engineer by suggesting the means to strengthen the fortress? All of the others turned and stared in amazement, and Count Marlanx went white as death. Never, blurted the Count. I will do anything the princess commands me to do, said Baldos. Do you mean that you serve her only? Said Laurie. I serve her first, sir. If she were here, she could command me to die, and there would be an end to Baldos, he said. He smiled as he said it. The real princess looked at him with a new, eager expression, as if something had just come clear to her. There was a chorus of coughing and a round of sly looks. She could hardly ask you to die, said Yetive, speaking for the first time. A princess is like April weather, madam, said Baldos with rare good humor, and the laugh was general. Yetive decided to talk privately with this excellent wit before an hour was up. She was confident that he knew she was actually the princess. I would like to ask the fellow another question, said Marlanx, fingering his sword hilt nervously. You say you serve the princess. Do you mean by that you imagine your duties as a soldier to compromise dancing attendance within the security of these walls? I believe that I enlisted as a member of the castle guard, sir. The duty of the guard is to protect the person of the ruler of Graustark, and to do that unto death, said Baldos. It is my belief you are a spy. You can show evidence of good faith by enlisting to fight against Osbergen, and by shooting to kill, said the Count. He had a sinister gleam in his eye. And if I decline to serve in any capacity other than the one I now... Then I will name you a spy and a coward. You've already called me a spy, Your Excellency. It will not make it true, let me add, if you then call me a coward. I refuse to take up arms against either Dawsbergen or Axphen. This remark created a profound sensation. Then what? You're employed by both of them instead of just one? Shouted the Iron Count. I am employed as a guard for Her Royal Highness, said Baldos, with a glance at Yetive. Not as a fighter in the ranks. I will fight until the death for her, but not for Graustark. And with that, we end the chapter. So, this is an interesting little, I guess, farce, little roundabout. I mean, except for Beverly, and I know I keep harping on this, but except for Beverly, everybody knows the truth. Most of it, anyway. Nobody's really sure who Baldos is. I'm not even really sure who Baldos is, but everybody knows who Beverly is not. And this whole dancing around everything is quite amusing, not gonna lie. It's keeping me keeping me interested and amused. So I am definitely enjoying this. I am kind of eager to, I guess, get to the end of this, not because I want it to be over, but because I am holding myself back from watching the movie adaptation of this until I finish the book adaptation, because I do want to be able to compare and contrast the two. I also, I'm pretty sure that the movie adaptation is a silent film, so that should be fun. I'm planning on probably doing a live stream of the movie since it's also in the public domain, so that should be kind of fun. I just have to decide on a when and a where, and like find out how many people would actually be interested in watching the live, etc., and so on. But that's a later thing. But for now, I'm actually really enjoying this one, and I hope you are too. Thank you for listening to yet another chapter of Beverly of Graustark, and I will see you next time.